Glorious's original GMMK was, in my opinion, a banger of a keyboard, offering a sleek, minimally branded keyboard at a very reasonable price with hot swap in 2017 was pretty much unheard of. Well, it's not 2017 anymore, it's 2022, and the keyboard market has changed a lot. And Glorious is no longer the only one offering hot swap boards. After a ton of hype and a lot of anticipation, they are finally releasing the GMMK 2. They were incredibly kind and sent one out for me to review, so today we're going to take a look at it and see if it holds up to the pedigree of the original. Quick note, given the price point and position of this board within the Glorious line, I'm going to be looking and judging at this board only in its stock form. Everything you see and hear today is stock, no mods. For reasons that'll make sense later in the video, I'm going to cover potential mods and upgrades you can do to this board in another video later on down the line. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. First things first, this is not a new GMMK Pro. I see a lot of comments of people seeming to think that this is a new or a refreshed version of the GMMK Pro. And while it does take a lot of design cues from that board, this is a refresh of their original GMMK, which was the first gaming-focused mechanical keyboard to offer hot swap sockets, or the ability to swap out switches. So while it does take some design cues from the GMMK Pro, the way this keyboard is priced is firmly within more of an entry level or maybe just a non-keyboard enthusiast price point. But this is a completely new design, which is more in tune for people who want maybe a little more subtlety in their setups, but don't want to plunk down $200 plus for any kind of an enthusiast keyboard. I've seen a lot of people be pretty critical about certain aspects of this keyboard, so let's dive right in. We're getting two sizes this time, a 65% and a 96% layout, versus the original which came in as 60%, TKL, and full-size form factors. You have your option of a bare bones board with no switches and caps at $79.99, and a pre-built board which comes in at $119.99, stocked with their new Fox linear switches, which I'll talk about in a minute. The 96%, a full-size layout, sports a number pad and everything, but with a toned-down, sleeker look, minimizing the amount of bezel and space between the keys. I'm a really big fan of this design. While I don't necessarily have any plans to use a full-size keyboard, if I was going to, this would be the design that I picked. The 65% board, the one we have in-house today, sports a pretty traditional 65% layout with the arrow cluster and navigational keys along with a 1.75U right shift over there on the right side. Normally, this has been a cause for concern in the past with 65% boards, but given Glorious's robust keycap lineup, most of which are compatible with this 65% board, it's less of a concern because Glorious has plenty of caps that fit this board, and ideally you'd be buying your caps directly from Glorious. You get the same color choices as before with black and white, and their brand new pink color. This isn't a pre-order or a group buy run like they did with their Model O wired version, something that has me incredibly excited and praying for a pink Model O wireless. Inside, you get the keyboard with a dust cover, some documentations as well as a sticker, a keycap puller, along with a color-matched escape key if for some odd reason you don't like their new logo on this novelty key, as well as a switch puller and a color-matched braided USB-C cable. Sporting an aluminum top plate with a plastic lower, the GMMK 2 retains the same floating switch design that the original GMMK had. Like the original GMMK, this thing is a beefy boy at about 900 grams. Retail boards have certainly come a long way, but an area where companies like Razer and Corsair always seem to cut corners is with the weight and the rigidity of their boards. Their boards can often feel pretty flimsy, while this thing feels like a tank. We get two side diffusers, much like we see on the GMMK Pro, that also double as the caps lock notification. We've got a center-mounted USB-C cable with a slightly recessed connection, again, very much like the GMMK Pro. And it's big enough to handle any aftermarket cables or any of Glorious's coiled cables that you might own. Inside the keyboard, we get a layer of acoustic foam between the top plate and the PCB, as well as underneath the PCB, and the bottom housing. And the attention to detail here is amazing. There is little dampening foam in between the little sections between the feet, as well as a dampener mount sort of thing for the USB-C daughter board. I'm a really big fan of this choice. Whether or not it actually adds to the acoustic profile remains to be seen, but it's little details like this that make me realize that they put a lot of thought into this board. On the bottom of the keyboard, we get this giant Glorious logo, which was probably engraved on the GMMK Pro, but given this is plastic, it's most likely directly built into the tool. If you opt for the complete pre-built board, this board comes equipped with Glorious's new Fox switch, which is a clear housing linear switch, and they come factory lube, and they feel pretty good. I'm not a fan of factory lube, generally speaking, but given the price point and the target audience for a board like this, it makes sense. There's a good chance that owners of this board might not ever open up their switches to lube them, and having some lube is better than having no lube at all. I've seen a lot of people comparing the Fox switch to Glorious's own Link switch, and while they are both linears, I don't think they're the same. The Fox switches feel a little bit smoother. I like them a little bit better than I do the Link switches, as well as the obvious thing that these have transparent housings, which will allow LED shine through. This, combined with the north-facing LEDs on this board, allow for some really rich and vibrant RGB, which, believe it or not, some people actually like. While having rainbow lighting isn't exactly my deal, I do appreciate having the ability to backlight my keycaps. It was something I noticed pretty immediately when switching over to a north-facing socket PCB, and while I don't always use a backlit keyboard, it's nice to have that option. Glorious doesn't have any plans to release the Fox as a standalone switch, so if you want to get your hands on this switch, the only way to do that is to buy the pre-built GMMK2, which I think makes sense. These switches aren't necessarily the best linear on the planet, but they're pretty good. I would take them over a Cherry Red or a Gateron Red pretty much any day of the week. Also, if you choose the pre-built, you get Glorious's new flavor of ABS double shot keycaps. This is the kind of stuff I'm talking about when I talk about subtle design choices. Gone are the days of aggressive gamery fonts. And while Glorious certainly isn't the pioneer of a look like this, I appreciate the iteration that they've gone through to come now to this more modern, sleek look. And Glorious is definitely one of those companies that has sort of forced the gaming peripheral market in that direction. I'm not sure who thought those futuristic fonts were a good idea, but I don't think they ever were. The keycaps are nice, the legends are good, they feel great, and on my 65% we get the front printed function legends. I'm always a fan of this when it's done well, and it looks great here. For those that might like the idea of a smaller form factor keyboard but are hesitant because they think they're going to lose all of their keys, having this might be a deciding factor to push them over the edge into small form factor keyboards. Let's talk stabilizers. With this board, you get a set of stock plate-mounted stabilizers, which come factory lubed, and they're a pretty huge improvement over the original GMMK stabilizers, as well as a far cry from most retail boards you can find, with the exception of maybe Ducky, and way better than the kinds of stabilizers you'd find on most other gaming-focused brands. I've seen far worse stabilizers come on keyboards at far higher price points. And given that this always feels like a place where companies feel like they can get away with cheaping out, it's nice to see some pretty decent stabilizers here. And although they sound pretty good with the factory lube, I'm really excited to see what these can sound like with a little bit of tuning. But if you're not one to use plate mount stabilizers, good news. This keyboard also supports PCB mounted screw-in stabilizers like Glorious's new GS-V2 stabilizers, of which I'm a pretty big fan. They're pretty hard to come by right now, but my suggestion is if you're going to upgrade these stabilizers, try to get your hands on the GS-V2s as soon as you can. Just keep an eye out on Glorious's website and Instagram. I've been getting word from them that they're trying to restock these as fast as they can. Along with the more recent releases of Glorious products, this keyboard is supported by Glorious's core software, which is a big improvement over their original keyboard software. You can, of course, get away with using this keyboard without any software, although I highly recommend at least downloading it just to get firmware updates. if you're the type of person that really likes to tinker with stuff, you also have the option of flashing QMK firmware to this board, if that's the sort of thing that tickles your fancy. I've seen a lot of people make comments about how this board has south-facing sockets, or isn't a gasket mount board, or has floating switches. And I think people are missing the point of a board like this. This board is meant to be an entry-level, or my preferred term, non-enthusiast keyboard for users who might not care about all the hottest keyboard buzzwords and just want a decent looking and sounding keyboard at a reasonable price. Or maybe you want RGB shine through on your caps. Or maybe you type in the dark and you want LED backlit keycaps. A feature I honestly didn't think I would miss until I was using a board without it. It's important to remember that Glorious isn't a bespoke keyboard manufacturer. In fact, it's in their name, Glorious PC Gaming Race. Glorious is a gaming peripheral company first, adding higher level or enthusiast level features to their keyboards and other peripherals without paying those high price tags. To simply put it, the best of both worlds. I can't count the number of times I've entered into a conversation with a friend who said they're interested in keyboards, and then their eyes start to glaze over as soon as I start talking about PCB mount stabilizers or different switches or different form factors. They just want a decent sounding keyboard that doesn't cost a ton of money. A majority of those people have tried my GMMK Pro and they agree. It sounds and feels great, but they just don't have that much time or effort to put into a keyboard like that. The nice thing about this keyboard is it has those enthusiast level features sort of tucked or hidden away, so that if the day ever comes, you can upgrade your stabilizers if you want to. If you want to flash QMK for more precise control over your function layers, you can do that. It has a ton of little features that a user can discover if they choose to, opposed to ordering PCB mount stabilizers and then finding out they're not compatible with their keyboard. This is the keyboard for those people. If you prefer having strong RGB, or just a strong backlight for your keyboard because you type in the dark, this is the keyboard for you. If you think spending $200 or even $150 is spending too much for a keyboard, this is the keyboard for you. If you don't want to spend $500, but you also don't want your spacebar to double as your baby's new rattle. If you want a good keyboard at a good price, without aggressive dials and branding and incredible support and a warranty from Glorious, this is the keyboard for you. I'm pretty aggressive in my thoughts that Glorious has played a big part in shifting these markets for the better. Whether it was after the Model O release and then all of a sudden every company started putting white PTFE feet on their mice, or more and more companies offering hot swap keyboards after the release of the GMMK and not offering their silly proprietary Romer G switches, I think we have Glorious in part to thank for that. My go-to recommendation for a while now has been the GMMK Pro. While, yeah, it can be expensive for somebody just entering the space, it's a good keyboard to get started with. But a good amount of the time, I see people visibly wince at that price. This is going to be my new recommendation for those that might not be ready for the GMMK Pro. This is going to be the keyboard I recommend to them, and then maybe offer them some screw-in stabilizers to see if I can't just push them down that rabbit hole a little bit. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to Glorious for sending this out to me. I can't thank you guys enough. Please subscribe if you can. I got a ton of cool stuff coming out. I got a bunch of giveaways that I'm going to be doing. So make sure you guys stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya!